Soldiers speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their futures. Soldiers speak out.
Welcome to Veterans Hour. I'm your host, Zahid Chaudhry. There's a situation in this world which requires our attention, and viewers and the world should know about this. And here we are. I have three community members here from Eastern Washington, from Spokane, Washington, and there is something happening there that the world should pay attention. So let me introduce Hollis Higgins, George Taylor, and Rusty Nelson. I'm your host, Zahid Chaudhry. So what is happening? What is the situation going on about the two psychologists, perhaps, which were the contractors? So can somebody please tell me what about it or clarify it to our audience?
Well, we have a situation that's ongoing in Spokane. We've known about it in Spokane for some time, particularly people who are interested in getting to the roots of horror of war on our globe. The particular situation is torture. The use of torture by our federal government, by agencies with support of federal agencies, so-called intelligence agencies, and military agencies. But this particular item originates from Fairchild Air Force Base near Spokane and has come to light through various leaks. Now, it almost came to light from a book one of the defendants wrote. But we're talking about Mitchell and Jessen. In Spokane, when we say Mitchell and Jessen, we talk about two psychologists who had a practice in Spokane, and as part of that practice, they worked with SERE at Fairchild Air Force Base at the U.S. Air Force Survival School. And this is something that our community has been very proud of for years. And this survival training that goes on supposedly is to make our warriors safe in case they are captured in hostile territory. We don't even have time today to start thinking about what it means to be in someone's territory as a prisoner, as someone shot down from an aircraft, bombing and killing civilians. So we won't go there. But the development came from practice in the survival school of psychologically and physically preparing military members for undergoing interrogation and torture at the hands of their captors. And Mitchell and Jessen, we have Bruce Jessen and James Mitchell, the psychologists, worked with the Air Force, contract consultants for the survival school, helping people to deal with psychological prospects of being captured by an enemy.
But in this case, are we talking about what they captured and did they save human life? Because I have issues with the word of safety or our service members which are captured. In this case, I think the newspapers and other things which they were talking about is they got tens of millions of dollars by having a contract to torture or perfect the torture techniques when they are healthcare professionals, perhaps.
Yes, exactly.
So focus.
Yeah, the way this became our problem,
Okay.
the problem of the community, is that these psychologists developed a re-engineered concept of the survival techniques to use as enhanced interrogation
Enhanced interrogation.
for the United States to use against captured suspects. And so,
So, just for the audience, I mean, audience knows what enhanced interrogation means is enhanced torture. And just when they use the word softening up, whether it be Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib prison, that means torture. So,
right. So
it's Orwellian speak. We should all have our radars on Orwellian speech.
Yes. Well, it's just a byproduct of our militarized society that the Pentagon has plenty of money to pay psychologists any price they wish to be consultants in something like even developing torture techniques, which of course is something that needs not to be developed because we all know torture techniques. We learn torture techniques watching television. So this is just extra stuff that they legitimize by having psychologists come up with it.
So what was it? Do you know the amount? I heard some figures just on some contract was tens of millions of dollars.
$81 million was the amount of money that is documented that was given to Mr. Mitchell, Mr. Jessen, and their company. It was a company of quite a few number of individuals, but they were the CEOs of the company, responsible for the company.
Well, not more than 40 individuals, so we are talking about big money for Mitchell and Jessen.
Big money for Mitchell and Jessen and a small number of employees. The U.S. government paid them $81 million. We've got the documents for that.
To develop torture techniques.
Not only to develop torture techniques to use on so-called enemies we captured abroad, but also to actually do it. And in the brief filed with the federal court in Spokane, they each are accused of personally administering these torture techniques. And they did this at extraordinary rendition sites that were abroad and the so-called black sites. These were not done in the United States. But Mr. Mitchell and Mr. Jessen were personally involved, as well as their company, and this is what the government paid $81 million of our taxpayer money to do.
And this was, they were able to arrange this because of the funding for CIA and other clandestine branches of the government. So there was not an original hard record because, of course, the CIA's budget is classified information. We are not allowed to know what kind of funding they possess. But here, this thing, we feel so involved as Veterans for Peace, as veterans at all, as citizens in the community, that our government would choose not only to spend money in this way, but to actually make a special effort to have torture available for suspected terrorists, suspected enemies of our country.
I mean, that was why we fought World War II, right? To defeat Nazism. And the Nuremberg trials came out. And it was decided at that point that torture was cruel, unusual punishment. It was outlawed on the international level. Our Constitution outlaws torture. The Bill of Rights outlaws torture. And the Constitution outlaws torture. It does. But what I wanted to say was the techniques that Mitchell and Jessen Associates developed went way beyond torture. I mean, we got it documented. There was 10 techniques that they were approved to use. Everything from slamming people against a wall to stripping them down into a cold room, dumping cold water on them.
Sleep deprivation.
Sleep deprivation. They broadcast rock music for hours and hours. They kept the lights on all night long, all day long. They never had any darkness.
They hung them from the ceiling.
Yeah, they just hung them. And so that's got to dislocate you in the first 5 minutes, right? And so these techniques also included the waterboarding. And it is a technique of simulated drowning. I believe we talked earlier about that. Is you put a wet rag over somebody's face is the mild way to do it. And then you pour water on the rag.
Buckets of water.
Buckets of water. There's no air coming through the cloth. And the justification was that, well, it didn't kill them, so it really didn't harm them, didn't harm their organs, so it wasn't really torture. That was the rationale. But what they were trying to do was develop a state of learned helplessness. This is way, way beyond torture. This is so that the interrogators could erase a person's personality and then imprint their own idea of what they wanted that particular brain to think. And then they could withdraw all the information and control that person, even as a possible agent later on, to go back out and get more people's information. But you've got to go back to what the SERE program really was at Fairchild Air Force Base. Strange name for a base that's torturing people. Fairchild doesn't really work.
Fair.
Yeah. How fair?
Orwellian fair.
Yeah. How fair is that?
Peace is war, war is peace is perpetual war.
That's right. War is peace, and
Ignorance is strength.
So the idea was the Air Force was training down pilots to survive for days in the wilderness, and it was called survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. That's where SERE comes from. Survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. And apparently it really does help pilots. On a couple of occasions, I guess there's been some verified good results from that. But to take that program of building up this strength and reversing it to try to tear down all these strengths in a human being, that is absolutely, as you say, Orwellian, but diabolical. It is no civilized human being would ever think of doing that, as far as I can see, as a peaceful human being.
And especially a psychologist who's a health professional.
Exactly.
Who takes a pledge when they're licensed to practice psychology to first do no harm to their patients. And when the American Psychological Association, of which they were both members, found out about their involvement with this torture program, they were expelled from that organization on the grounds that they did do harm to people, even before this case came forward.
Because they were medical professionals, health professionals,
Yes.
and now they know people in their most helpless state,
Right.
and when they're most vulnerable, and then using that most vulnerable position of an individual, a captive person with no rights, okay, because we created a framework, legal framework around that,
Yes.
and then using the most vulnerable person and then torturing them and exploiting them. I mean, that is, I don't think even animals do, for even the animals who eat, for a living.
Right.
They don't exploit the vulnerabilities to torture them for the sake of torture or other things. And second thing, what you said, for our audience, the clarity is the Nuremberg principle. Nuremberg principle being the trials which United States carried out in Nuremberg, Germany, and the Nuremberg principle refers to crimes against humanity. Crimes against humanity. So United States went to Germany and charged Nazi officials, German Nazi officials, and including judges, that they okayed it. So if any official, any instrument of state knows about it, and they do not raise their voice, they are complicit in those crimes against humanity. So that is a Nuremberg principle. So if you know about it, even though you didn't sanction it, so even if you are remotely removed from it, but if you know about it and you did not raise your voice about it, that person is complicit in that crimes against humanity.
And that is put into codified as U.S. law because the United States was a signatory to the Nuremberg Principles, and it was a treaty. Therefore, it's part of U.S. law. Even today, you'll find hardly any judges who will accept the Nuremberg Principles as defense for someone doing civil resistance or trying to correct an injustice in the United States. So the public needs to have the Nuremberg Principles in front of our faces all the time, because we are violating Nuremberg Principles. As you say, if we know wrong that's being done and simply turn our backs and walk away, we violate that law. And so there's a lot of accountability to go around, but especially when we have an extraordinary case like Mitchell and Jessup, where many people thought as soon as the federal government, the wider federal government found out what had happened here, that all of the CIA money had been expended to support this ridiculously simple but devious and diabolical plan. Surely somebody would end it, but they didn't. And when it was finally ended, when Obama said that this is not who we are, we don't torture people, as if we had never tortured anybody, then they stopped this, they stopped the extradition, they stopped the rendition, and still there was no justice in this. One of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit against Mitchell and Jessen died, not from the acts of physical torture or the waterboarding or anything, but from exposure, being left in a cold cell after being doused with water, as Hollis mentioned. This was just the kind of thing that was routine in these black sites, and nobody expected the guy to die from hypothermia in some hot country. But dungeons are not nice, you know? So this is the kind of thing that just dragged on until finally the case was brought. This case was brought by the ACLU. The American Civil Liberties Union was the only legal entity that could work this out so that they could actually bring charges. Now, in Washington, we have a very active and very strong ACLU, but the Washington ACLU did not bring this case. They took it to the top. This is out of New York, national headquarters for ACLU. They've got their best lawyers on this, the best litigators, and it still seemed unlikely since the venue was Spokane, Washington, home of Fairchild Air Force Base and its vaunted survival school. But they didn't count on getting a judge who is more than semi-retired, has been around forever, but comes back and hears cases, Judge Justin Quackenbush. And he stood up for the Constitution. He stood up for those of us in the United States who take seriously our responsibility under the U.S. Constitution, including the Nuremberg Principles. And so this trial is proceeding. We have delays. Probably will have fines against the defendants and their defense attorneys because they are not coming up to the judge's standard for presenting evidence, for putting the case together, and coming forward with the evidence that he has demanded. So,
like, what kind of evidence the judge demanded? What was it?
I was in the courtroom in the federal courthouse. It's called the Thomas Foley Courthouse in Spokane in April when this motion to dismiss this case was made by the defendants, Mitchell and Jessen. They wanted this case thrown out of court, and many, because they were contractors with the U.S. government, and the precedent was that many other contractors, military contractors who are civilians, have been sued, and in previous cases, federal judges were very shy about allowing these cases to go forward because in some strange way, the U.S. government is exempt in certain cases for being sued. But in this case, I was in the courtroom when Judge Quackenbush said to the defendants' lawyers, I'm going to allow this case to go forward because it has merit and it has standing. Now, he also said, I understand from the brief that you filed to dismiss this case that there was a contract between the CIA and defendants Mitchell and Jessen. He said, have you seen that contract?
He said, the judge said that to the defendant's attorneys.
Yes, the defendants were present in the courtroom, but four very highly paid attorneys from Philadelphia were there.
$800 suits, right?
$800 suits. And so the lead lawyer for them hesitated and says, no, Your Honor, we have not seen the contract. And then the judge said, why not?
So defendant's own attorney has not seen their contract with the CIA. How could that be?
They look like deer in the headlights. It was such an obvious question, and why didn't they anticipate it? Anyway, So the judge says, well, why haven't you seen the contract? It's in your brief. It's a central part of your case. And they said, well, I don't know, Your Honor. We'll maybe try and find it. He said, do you know if it exists? They said, we assume that it exists. He said, I want that contract on my desk in 30 days. He said, do you think you could assemble this in, say, 15 days, all the documents I need? And they said, well, Your Honor, 2 weeks is a little tight. He said,
my question is this. This is all the documents they already have. They just have to make a copy in a copier, which takes few minutes.
Yes.
It's not nothing they have to create from scratch.
Yes.
If they're honest and if they want to act in good faith.
Yes. So he said, oh, well, how about 30 days? He said, 30 days max. And the lawyer said, yeah, they stumbled around. They said, yes, Your Honor, I think we can get it there in 30 days. And as I understand it, Rusty, what happened on the date that they should get these documents there?
They weren't there. The documents did not arrive. But see, I think we've got to cut these lawyers in the slack here. You see, we're talking about a contract with the CIA.
So what? They're above the law?
No.
They're above the United States?
Of course they are.
I mean, not really. I mean, the power flows from we the people. We are the ultimate holders of power.
Well, something else happened there.
But see, a CIA contract, don't you understand? It's like the message of instructions from the Impossible Mission Force.
Plausible deniability.
You sign it and it goes, it disappears.
But we ought to have good records. This is our public money. This is our collective wealth. This is our taxpayers' money. It's been used for torture. Americans are great people. They do not support torture. I mean, the whole world, our reputation is online. Is that what we do? And the beauty of America, as in the famous saying, doesn't lie that it doesn't make mistakes. It lies when it makes mistakes. It tries to correct them as soon as possible.
Well, here's the thing about the Attorney General of the United States officer was there. George reported this to me, and I'll just tell you what he told me. The attorney for the United States says, Judge, we really have some sensitive information, and we don't think we're going to be able to give you anything but redacted copy, and we're going to have to not give you some of the information.
And then Judge Quackenbush raised his forefinger in the air in the courtroom, and I could see his face almost getting red. And he said, I will decide what documents are needed. He said, I will decide, not the CIA. He said, that's why we have a judiciary in this country, to correct when the legislative and executive branches make mistakes, the judiciary...
Or abuse their power, perhaps.
Or abuse their power. And so he said, I will decide what documents I want here in 30 days. And that will include a copy of that contract that you yourselves mentioned in the brief. And he said, I'm allowing this case to go forward. I'm denying your motion to dismiss the case. And I want those documents there. And the DOJ, the Department of Justice representative there said, he kind of swallowed hard and said, yes, Your Honor, we'll do our best. In other words, trying to be polite in the courtroom, but we feel that maybe they're going to try and drag this out. Rusty thinks that most of the documents are there 3 days after the deadline. I don't know if the contract appeared because it's all in the discovery period that could take up to a year. They call it a discovery period when both sides agree to the rules of the trial, including the rules of evidence. Because each side, the defendants have to see the evidence that ACLU has, and ACLU needs to see what the defendants' lawyers have. But that I don't think the case will come to trial in a year, and we're in contact with Sean Vestal, who is a reporter for the Spokesman Review, who has been on this case like a dog on a bone. He is one of the old-fashioned investigative reporters.
We still have some of them left around?
Yes, we do.
I thought media was all about a show now, entertainment rather than investigative journalism.
Much of it is, but his editors they've said to him, you go after this case, even though it embarrasses a unit of a major Air Force base that provides a lot of jobs and a lot of income to the Spokane area. And normally,
the number one employer in Spokane County is Fairchild AFB.
And normally, the Spokesman Review would be sympathetic toward military issues in the area. But in this case, they said to Sean Vestal, you go after that story. When he broke the story, it was front page headlines above the fold, first page, front page. And they say, you go wherever the truth leads you. He told me he went up to Mr. Jessen's house, who still lives in Spokane, and knocked on the door. And there was no one there. He didn't tell him he was coming, but he just took a chance. And I'm not sure he would give him an interview anyway. But then Mr. Mitchell is retired in Florida, and Rusty has a story about an interview that he had down there in a boat.
Hollis had the boat story. I saw him on a national television program giving an interview, standing out in the field in Florida somewhere.
So, Hollis, what is this interview? Who did Mitch?
You know, I don't recall the interviewer's name, but he got an interview with Mitchell, and Mitchell agreed. So he comes out to Mitchell's place, which is on a lake, which is next to a national reserve for hundreds of miles, apparently. There's alligators all around because it's in Florida, right? So he's on the boat, and they go out there and they do a paddle around and stuff. And Mitchell thinks that it was not wrong. Anything he
Torture is not wrong. Crimes against the humanity is not wrong.
He said because it was legal.
Oh,
it was legalized by the Bush administration, and there's the judge was Bybee. The attorney from the Attorney General's office was, I think, named
Yang or you?
Yeah, and he's teaching at Stanford, I think. And there's protests by Wolf Can't Wait all the time, protesting this attorney's assignment as an educator. But what I wanted to mention was the interviewer didn't know what he had gotten himself into, because he actually got Mitchell to admit he had personally administered waterboarding, personally done that as part of his research and part of his experiment with the SERE program. So why does that
crimes against humanity, self-admittal of a healthcare professional that he exploited vulnerable individuals and he committed crimes against humanity. That is quite interesting. You see, our audience happens to be very enlightened, and they know that apartheid was legal.
Mm-hmm. Legal.
So slavery was legal.
Jim Crow was
legal
in the South.
So there's so many things which were legal, but we all know are ethically and morally wrong.
Well,
we know that deep in our heart.
Bush and Cheney have both admitted to authorizing torture. I think Cheney did. I know Bush did in public media. And he thought that he had covered his tracks legally so that he could admit that. Well, Rumsfeld can't even go out of the country to Europe because he's under indictment internationally for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
A Spanish judge issued that warrant.
Yeah.
Well, Bush can't even go to Canada. He got smuggled in there because they're assigned to that same treaty that says we'll prosecute any international criminal for that crimes against humanity.
But let's be clear that these people are not confessing to committing crimes against humanity.
They're confessing to torture. They're confessing to being present. It all comes down to semantics of the words.
Semantics.
And the words. I mean, this is Orwellian language, double meaning. But, you know...
He's not confessing to doing the crimes. He's bragging about serving his country and being a wonderful...
Hitler said that. Hitler said that many times. Mm-hmm. He served the country.
Of course.
He served his country. I mean, I've been to Germany, I hope many of you, and I've interviewed many Germans, you know, from high officials, from bureaucrats to, I said, did Hitler serve you? I could not find a single person who said that, you know, it all comes down to the legacy. It comes down to the next generation and what they find in their heart. And our audience of this program happens to be very enlightened. They know the difference between a sovereign nation laws and treaty. Treaty is above any sovereign nation's laws. Treaty is above.
Yes.
So,
and President Nixon was quoted once as saying, while he was in office, if a president does it, it's legal. And of course, we know that's not true because a president is not above the law.
Yes. That's why we have, you know, yin and yang. That's why we have harmony. So we have three branches. So that's why, tell me what the judge said with a finger.
He had his finger up in the air and said, that's why we have a judiciary in this country, to check the abuses of the executive branch when it goes astray.
Right. Also, your audience is enlightened enough to think that there might be a tongue in a cheek somewhere when you talk about the wonderful things that always work for the United States. You know,
Wonderful thing. I do not know. I'm too naive. So
Yes,
perhaps
I'm
please
sure
enlighten me. I
I'm
happen
sure
to
you
be the
are.
youngest of all. So please enlighten me. No, really. Sometimes my naivety is so much. It's just out of this world. So please enlighten me.
You speak, as most Americans do, of how our system would never allow these things to happen because the power resides within the people, and we would not let ourselves be led down the garden path by elements of our federal government so that we would actually allow crimes like this to escape prosecution. So that's part of our problem, is because we have this mindset, this flag-waving mindset in our community in particular, I think, that says that our federal government would never do anything wrong. If they want to call it enhanced interrogation, then that's what it is. If they say it's not torture, it's not torture. It's too bad that guy died, but he was probably a terrorist anyway.
But the judge said, standing. Now our audience knows what standing is. Standing means there's an injured party. The maximums of law, maximums of positive jurisprudence. Standing is at the very core of any matter, and when that is established, that there's an injured party, so there is a person who have died from it, and two persons
who were badly injured and tortured, and they will be the eyewitnesses. They both agreed to take the stand, and when Mitchell and Jessen are in the courtroom, and the judge or so the attorneys say, "Who is the person who tortured you?" They can point to the person in the courtroom and say, this person and this person, Mitchell and Jessen. They may not have even known their names.
I think standing is one of the reasons that we look at this, and we've known about this for years, you see. But we could not get someone to recognize the standing of these injured parties because nobody wanted to say that they should be treated right as American citizens have the right to be treated.
I thought all humans are equal.
Well,
Constitution says that.
We're working.
Self-evident truths.
It's a work in progress, Zahid.
Thank you, my dear friend.
Well, I gotta say, this takes us back to the idea that I've heard over and over again that there was a serious coup in the United States when Bush supposedly became president, when the vote count was stopped in Florida.
In the year 2000.
In the year 2000. Now, if there was a coup, then you can just erase all the laws, and then you have to start, you have to start thinking about who are these persons that we need now to challenge. And I got this little thing here in Seattle, Washington, from World Can't Wait, back in the early 2000s, and it says, "Drive out the Bush regime." And I wear this thing all the time still, because we still have those guys. I said guys. We still have those people controlling our deep government, and how do we work against that? That's what I really want to know. That's why I'm with Vets for Peace, and that's why I'm doing peace work. I don't expect any sudden discoveries, but it's consistent work. You have to just keep working at it, and then something like this comes along where you have this case that's going to focus on this torture, this incredible crime against humanity, and it's just taken a lot of people a long time to get to this point. So I gotta say, I appreciate Vets for Peace more and more. World Can't Wait, fantastic. Code Pink. Voices for Creative Nonviolence, but I'm just hoping that we can work together more as a state of all the chapters working together, and I'm hoping we can have a caucus at some point to begin work on that. But anyway, getting back to the case, we were on the sidewalk that morning, which was, guess what, Earth Day. It was the 22nd of April of 2015.
No, this year,
2016. And we were there with the Peace and Justice Action League, and there was about 20 of us, and we have a picture. In fact, Pajals has it on their website, the Peace and Justice Action League of Spokane.
So please, can you let our audience know what is the website? The website will be right here, but What is the website? Can you say it?
Yes, if you go to the Peace and Justice Action League of Spokane, they are currently, as one of their featured photos on their website, is a picture of us standing on the sidewalk, and we have banners and we have signs, and people were chalking the sidewalk. And the suits walked by after the hearing, and they looked at us and kind of went scornfully, "You guys aren't going to get anything out of this." And we all went. Well,
so what is the website URL, if you don't mind?
Oh, it's
Please.
www.pajals or PJALS.com.
.org? .org.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And if you want to go to our website, we'll post that picture too, and that is www.SpokaneVeteransForPeace.org.
All one word?
Yeah, SpokaneVeteransForPeace.org. And you'll find some of our other activities. But I wanted to say I made a sign, and it was there, and it has my sentiments about why we needed to be there. And it goes like this: to condone torture is to deny yourself life.
To condone torture is to deny yourself life.
In other words, if you have the ability or the personality or the whatever to torture another human being, then that's like taking your own life away when you do stuff.
I'd like to bring up a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., one of the great prophets of our time, who said, "An injury done to one human being is an injury done to all human beings." So that is another reason why this is important. But I want to come back to something Hollis said. He said in that interview with Mitchell, Mitchell said with the reporter, that I did this because I was serving my country and it was completely legal and I was under contract with the CIA. Therefore, I don't think I did anything wrong. And after a lot of this information came forward in a Senate intelligence report that reviewed these enhanced interrogation techniques, no less than the conservative Senator John McCain from Arizona stood up on the floor of the U.S. Senate and he said three important things. He said, "I am a POW in a prisoner of war camp in North Vietnam, and I was tortured as an American POW. He said, I can tell you right now, torture does not work. It does not yield useful information. Secondly, torture is wrong. It's simply morally wrong. It's not in the American tradition, and I, John McCain, a POW war veteran of Vietnam, oppose all forms of torture, not only because it doesn't work, but because it's not right and it's prohibited by the Geneva Conventions." And then he said one other important thing. He said, this is taking away this torture program on all the levels, not only Mitchell and Jessen, but on all the levels, because Mitchell and Jessen weren't the only ones. We've got Abu Ghraib and other
Guantanamo,
other sites of torture administered by American agencies, like Rusty said. He said, this is jeopardizing our national security because our enemies can say, you Americans are practicing torture, so therefore when we capture one of your pilots in a flight mission over Libya or Syria or Afghanistan, if we capture one of your people, we can torture too, because you already do by your own admission. We can't take the moral high ground here and say, we Americans do not torture. This is not in our tradition. And he said that completely pulls the rug out of that moral high ground. So Senator John McCain, a conservative Republican from Arizona, is opposed to this program. And he's now the chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Committee.
Well, I would like to point out something. Go back to Vietnam, and I had a high school teammate who was in the Hanoi Hilton, next cage over from John McCain.
Next occasion.
Yeah, they had a joining.
Explain what the Hanoi Hilton is.
Well, this Hanoi
Thank you,
Hilton was
because it took me, please,
Yeah.
my audience. So,
well,
Not a luxury hotel.
I hate to say that it's part of my history as an American, but it is.
what you were doing in Hanoi is, I think, in Vietnam. So what were you doing there?
Well, I wasn't in Hanoi.
Okay.
I didn't know about these things. I knew my friend, when I went to Vietnam, I knew that my friend had been shot down.
Oh,
He
okay.
was an Air Force pilot.
Okay.
And, but I found out later, of course, about all of this torture. The tiger cages that they used did not allow the prisoner to stand upright.
Mm-hmm.
They were often tied in various ways. That's why Senator McCain, to this day, cannot raise his arms above about this level. And he suffers quite a bit from it. But the thing that's never mentioned here is that the North Vietnamese torturers felt perfectly justified because they heard stories about things that we in South Vietnam,
America or the
the
government.
United States military,
Mhm.
with the CIA involvement,
Mhm.
what we were doing to people that we captured and interrogated, including taking prisoners up into a helicopter
Mhm.
and threatening them
To
to be pushed out if they didn't tell something or other, and they would have more than one prisoner, and they might just start out by throwing the first one out.
Mhm.
And this kind of thing went on all the time, and nobody ever investigated anybody on that. And so when you have Mitchell and Jessen and the CIA working together, they never expected to have any flap about these expenditures and these efforts to try to induce this helplessness, state of helplessness. But so it's part of our history, and this is the way war works. You can't have a war without having serious breaches of inhumane treatment and serious
why not?
human rights violations.
Do we have to have a war?
We don't have to have a war, but if we have a war, we have to have these horrible things happening because that's what war is about. It's about not only killing people, but terrorizing people. And this is why we are in this cycle of perpetual war, because we feel like the way to fight terrorism is with counterterrorism. And what is counterterrorism?
Terrorism. First and foremost.
Of course.
Exactly.
So 1400 years ago, I am multi-spiritual, and 1400 years ago, somebody said, that if there ought to be a war, make sure no tree is cut, no innocent civilian is harmed, no home or farm is damaged. So perhaps,
Well, people talk about the just war, and you want.
I don't talk about just war.
Well,
So I can't see, I was reading somebody's shirt and it says, was it the futility? I'm a soldier. I hate war. Only a soldier
the
can.
Dwight Eisenhower quote.
Dwight Eisenhower quote. Because I have seen his stupidity and what are the words?
Brutality.
Yeah. So
As I hate war as only a soldier can hate war, and so that's who we are. We are soldiers who hate war because we understand how ridiculous it all is and how tragic it all is.
Well, it didn't always start out that way. We all kind of thought, I shot down all the little army men in the backyard with my BB gun and my rubber bands in the winter and clods and that sort of thing. And I thought combat on TV was the best show ever.
So it's a normalization of war, death and destruction.
My mom wanted me to go into the military because of all the benefits that I could bring back to the family.
Is that our employment program in this country?
Well, it's jobs blackmail is what we used to call it back in the 60s. And that was until you went off and served, you couldn't come back to the States and get a good job. So you'd live in poverty, or you'd become homeless, or you'd be a perpetual, student or living at home because you would not be hired by
In those days, I grew up in the same era. In those days, every prospective employer, when you came for an interview, would say, "What have you done about your military service?" Because there was a universal military draft in those days. And then it went to lottery, and then we went to an all-volunteer force. But back in the days of the draft, every employer that I went to after college said, come back and see us after you serve in the military.
I did come back, and I went back to my other job. I was a surveyor's assistant, and I said, okay, I'm out of the service now. I'm ready to go back out on the survey crew. And they said, well, we don't have an opening.
I'm sorry.
Instead of
I didn't know what my rights were. So I said,
instead of saying I've just served the country, why can't you work me in?
Get his job back or something.
Yeah. I also, in this discussion, it's occurred to me another quote by one of our great peace prophets of our time, Mahatma Gandhi in India, who was an advocate of nonviolence, and he said, violence begets violence. So when you get into a war where violence is committed and then violence back, as Rusty has reminded us, that if you're going to have terrorism and then counterterrorism, it's just, and Gandhi went on to say, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And in my tradition, Jesus said, love your enemies, which is an interesting thought in regard to our global war on terrorism. What if we decided to sit down with so-called ISIS leaders and other leaders in the Middle East, and we decided to sit down with them and say, let's talk about this. Let's talk this through. What are your problems with us? And then we can explain our problems to you. We'll sit at a table and we'll work it through. What's wrong with that?
But we get into so many complications. You know, our solutions for perpetual war are quite simple. The obstruction of our solutions are quite complicated. So we have the education process in our country is unfortunately controlled by people who see it advantageous to keep perpetual war.
You mean the 1984 Orwellian never-ending war? You mean perpetual? Perpetual means forever going,
Well,
never ending.
I just mean the perpetual war that we've had since, let's see, I won't start with 9/11.
There's a poster. There's a Veterans for Peace poster somebody was mentioning that America has been at war 227 years out of the 229, and that poster was several years old.
Yeah,
So
Well, Vietnam established the fact that there would be ongoing and never-ending war. That was what the whole economy thing was all about. But I saw in Tacoma, a guy had a chart. Perpetual war might be misunderstood because the British are just now paying off their interest rates from World War I. And it's in the billions because of the accumulation. And we haven't even started paying for some of these other wars. So
who do we pay this interest to?
Yeah,
I just wonder.
I don't
mean,
know.
who finances war? Who profits from war? Who profits from that paradigm of death and destruction? Me, Zahid, people say Zahid's being a philosopher, Zahid's 3 L's: love, life, and living. I mean, I don't believe in fighting. I'm committed to nonviolence. I'm committed pacifist in my new incarnation now. So I just wonder. I mean, some people say fight a paradigm. I don't believe in fighting because I believe in love, life, and living. So if we create an alternative paradigm of love, life, and living, perhaps we don't have to fight the paradigm of death and destruction and violence.
Well,
So once that other paradigm becomes popular, once our culture is not so militarized, once our kids are not given guns to go shoot imaginary characters or other things, when everything they're given, rather than they're given a great education. And I heard some word from both of you and from 2 of you, and it says learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. There's a very good book written by David Spring, and he talks about kids' curriculum, syllabus, books. And the whole purpose of that new curriculum, the Orwellian curriculum, the syllabus, the books, is for the children to learn helplessness. I remember several years ago, I heard from some people who had privilege, the right color of skin and stuff, as they said to me that I do not mind torture because I am white. I would not be tortured. There would be brown, black, and yellow people and other people who would be tortured. I don't care. He says that it does not affect me. Okay, so I do not care about torture. So to me, irony is that those same psychologists who were perfecting, some of those same psychologists who were perfecting those torture techniques on people abroad are the ones who are writing the curriculum of my grandchildren. You know, I have 5 grandchildren from 7 to 11 years old. And now when they come of age, they will study that curriculum, which is designed to take away their potential for life, their brain potential, their potential to do goodness, and they are ought to learn a curriculum developed by the billionaires, okay, to profit, is registered, you know, trademark, to learn helplessness. And you were talking about learned helplessness. So David Spring's book is about some curriculum developed. And I think that David Spring is a very good educator in Washington State, you know, has lots of credibility. And his book is called Weapons of Mass Deception. So there's a public school and has lots of missiles being fired on it, and the weapons of mass deception. So that came to mind when you were mentioning that again and again. To my mind, I remember David Spring's words, you know, learn helplessness. So somebody please tell me, why, Rusty Nelson, why does it matter? Why does it matter to anybody else? I know my audience knows, my audience, each and every one of you, you are not free. You are not free till I am liberated. You know, your and my liberation is connected. So you tell me why anybody on the planet should care about it, let alone America, where we can see something we unleashed a genie outside, away, overseas, which has come home to roost to brainwash and learn helplessness on our kids and grandkids. So you tell me, Rusty Nelson, why any American citizen of this empire or anybody on the planet should care about this torture. Why? Why?
Because although we have been deceived to think that we are all in different categories, I grew up in white privilege in the Deep South during segregation. I was taught that my security lay in maintaining my white privilege. Instead of being taught that we are all in the same boat, even though we use that phrase, you know what I'm saying? We're all in the same boat. But when it came down to reality and the details of our education and our acculturation, it was, you're all in the same boat, but you remember, you are in charge of your boat. You're the captain, and these other people are disposable. If your boat is in trouble, the white people cannot be thrown overboard to lighten the load. This was the acculturation we had, and this is the thing that still is used to divide us as a country. We still have so many things. We have economic divisions that are being, you know, our economic polarization is just on steroids as we become both richer and poorer. And that further divides us. And the disappearing middle class that used to hold the rich and the poor together is now disappearing, as all of the middle class either aspires to be in the rich class or is sliding into the poor class. And this is in the hands of people who profit from these divisions. And so whether it's political parties or religious denominations, our differences are being underscored all the time. And we are, it's up to us on our own to learn about each other so that we know that we are brothers and sisters and not people coming from different planets here. We have so many things we are taught to aspire to. All Americans are expected to aspire to great wealth.
Wealth of what kind? To me, my grandmother taught me, her teachings taught me what wealth is. It is not measured in gold and silver. It is not wealth measured in monetary terms. It is a wealth of knowledge. It's a wealth of being close to the ground as being a farmer. It's a wealth of creating community. So what wealth do you need?
She couldn't have gotten elected to anything in the United States.
I'm sorry. She was a refugee from one country to another. One empire, British Empire, imploded because empires don't explode. They implode on themselves. So, my dear friend, George, tell me why the torture, why somebody anywhere on the planet should care about Mitchell and Jefferson case, these crimes against humanity, why somebody should care? Why?
The reason why we all should care about torture is that it poisons our soul. It damages human beings, and it poisons the souls of the torturers themselves, although they may not realize it at the time, but it poisons the well of our total humanity. I go back to Martin Luther King, who said that an injury done to one human being, an injustice done to one human being, is an injustice done to all of us. All of us. It pollutes the whole well. Torture is morally wrong. It's against our laws that exist on the books. It's against the Geneva Conventions. It's not in the American tradition or any tradition. And I'll just conclude with my own spiritual tradition, which says that it's important to treat other human beings the way you would like other human beings to treat you. It's called the Golden Rule.
The Golden Rule.
In fact, that's what we name our peace ship that's going around the Pacific Ocean right now in the cause of peace and nuclear disarmament. We call it the Golden Rule because what person in their right mind would unleash a nuclear weapon against another nation that's going to cause them great harm and maybe cause another nuclear weapon to be released onto my nation, killing my children, my family, my grandchildren? Who would do that? In other words, a violation of the Golden Rule, as torture clearly is a violation of our total humanity.
Thank you so very much. My dear brother Hollis, tell me why. Tell me why. Why this matter of torture, this crimes against humanity, matters circa 2016. Why anybody on the planet should care about it.
I'd like to refer to my quote I said earlier that if you condone torture, you deny yourself life. And it seems that if you have animosity towards anyone else, it will come back to bite you on the ass. It will destroy you. That's why gentle criticism, I'm finding out, is much better to relate with problems of the world. But which is another thing that you brought up, is if we care about other people, then it's because we know them. It's because we've met them, we've worked with them. Otherwise, we don't care. We really don't. I don't know why human beings are like that, but yeah, it's always the other that gets killed. And we heard amazing performances last night about how the world is being destroyed. The actual physical world we know is over. It is done because of the way we have lived. And I just say, my own philosophy is now I'm not a Republican, a Democrat, a progressive, a communist, a socialist. Now,
Not divided and conquered, not badged, not branded, just a human being.
I'm trying to put myself back together, but
Okay.
I call myself a communalist now, a person who cares about his communities, and we all have more than one. You have your neighborhood. I have my Vets for Peace group. I have my family and my associates. But my point that I'd like to make is if we cooperate with each other, we can all be here. If we don't cooperate, we'll destroy ourselves.
My dear brothers and sisters, and please tell me if that offends you, because I want to live my life as we are all here, brothers and sisters. Dr. King's words remind us, either we will live together as brothers and sisters or perish together as fools. The eternal optimist in me tells me and reminds me clearly, let's live together as brothers and sisters, the paradigm of love, life, and living. Thank you so very much for watching. I'm your host, Zahid Chaudhry, and have a great day, and let's do great noble work of peace. Thank you.